The sensor array on Vet Station had never missed a ship in 4,000 years of operation. It did not miss this one either. It logged the arrival at 1312 station time. A small vessel dropping out of faster-than-light travel in Sector 9 without a filed flight plan, without a registered entry code, without so much as a warning ping to clear the lane. The array flagged it, cataloged its whole signature, cross-referenced its design against every known species in the Galactic registry, and returned a result in under 2 seconds. Human Duty Officer V looked at the screen. He looked at his second officer, Dren, across the room. Then he laughed, a short, sharp sound like something being snapped in half. "Come look," he said. Dren came, he looked, he laughed too. Humans were a young species. That was the diplomatic way to say it. In private, in the officers' lounges of every Keith military station, in the council halls of the Marine Collective, in the trading floors of the Sarathi Exchange, the less diplomatic version circulated freely. Humans were a nothing species. They had cracked faster-than-light travel 40 years ago, which was, by galactic standards, roughly equivalent to a child learning to walk. They had a single home system, 2 colony stations, both small, both unimpressive, no military fleet worth recording, no territory beyond what they had been born into, no political weight anywhere in the galaxy. They had attended 3 Galactic Council sessions in 40 years. At all 3 they had said very little. The Council had listened politely and forgotten them before the session was over. They were not a threat. They were not an ally. They were not a curiosity. They were background. Val opened a calm channel to the unregistered vessel and leaned back in his chair with the easy posture of a man handling something minor. Unregistered vessel. You have entered controlled space without filing a flight plan or obtaining a sector clearance. Identify yourself and hold your position for redirection to the outer processing zone. A pause shorter than he expected. "This is Captain Yara Chen of the ISV Meridian." The voice was calm, not the careful calm of someone managing nerves, the ordinary calm of someone going through a routine. "We're requesting a berth at Vet Station. We have cargo to offload and supplies to purchase." Var sat up slightly. "You do not have authorization to dock at this station," he said. "Well, take berth 47, the voice said. "We'll be there in 12 minutes. The channel closed. Var stared at the comm unit. He looked at Dren. Dren looked back at him with an expression that lived somewhere between confusion and amusement. The expression of someone watching a small animal do something unexpected. Then Val started filling out the unauthorized docking paperwork because that was the correct procedure and because this would be resolved within the hour and because it was World 312 in the morning and he was not going to let one irrelevant human ship make his shift complicated. The ISV Meridian was 180 meters long. For context, a Keth heavy cruiser was 3 kilometers. A Katha patrol vessel ran 400 meters on a quiet day. The main diplomatic transports that came through Sector 9 regularly were half a kilometer just for the forward section. Even the merchant haulers operated by the small territory of Sarathi ran larger than the Meridian. The Meridian was by every measurable galactic standard not a ship. It was a model of a ship, a sketch, something you built and then looked at and thought, yes, the proportions are right, but we should scale it up before we actually use it. Its hull was dull gray, not painted gray the way things get when they have been out in hard vacuum long enough that the color simply leaves. There were scratches across the forward section, burn marks along the starboard side, a long gouge running the length of the porthole that had been sealed with repair foam that had dried a slightly different shade than the rest of the ship. The kind of ship you loved or apologized for, depending on who was asking. Captain Yara Chen had never apologized for it once. She sat in her captain's chair as Beth Station grew in the forward window. A disk 3 kilometers wide, spinning slow and steady, lit from within. Massive in the way that things which have existed for a very long time become massive. Not just physically in the way that power accumulates in structures, the way certain rooms feel heavier than they should. Yara had been looking at structures like that her whole life. 2 patrol ships behind us, said Kofi from the sensor station. He was 26, focused in the manner of someone who had never once started something he didn't finish. Not targeting, just following. They want to see what we do, said Osi without looking up from the navigation console. He was chewing on the end of a stylus. He did that when he was thinking something through. Let them watch, Yara said. The Meridian moved through the traffic lanes with quiet intention. Other ships adjusted around it, not in deference, but the way foot traffic adjusts around something slow and inconvenient. The KE cargo haulers and marine couriers and Sarathi exchange vessels moved in their lanes, conducted their business, and did not look at the small gray human ship the way you look at something that matters. They looked at it the way you notice a smudge on a window. Briefly, without retention, Yara noticed how they noticed. She had been noticing that her whole career. Berth 47 is available, O said. Station control hasn't denied the request. They won't, Yara said. Denying it means dealing with it. Letting us dock means processing a fine and waiting for us to leave. And if we don't leave, Yara was quiet for a moment. Through the window, Veith Station filled the view. 600,000 permanent residents, the commercial center of 4 Keth systems. More registered trade volume per station day than the entire human colony network processed in a month. Ships arriving and departing in a rhythm as steady as breathing, then it becomes a different kind of problem, she said. In the regional office of the Galactic Council on Viet Station, a bureaucrat named Silvar received the unauthorized docking alert at Idri Onwaraid and looked at it with the unhurried expression of a man who had seen every minor violation that existed. Zailvar was marine. His species communicated in a combination of spoken language and color shifts in their translucent skin, a system that was nuanced, expressive, and deeply efficient for conveying contempt, of which Selvar had refined an extensive range. When he pulled up the alert and saw the registration flag, human vessel, no flight plan, no clearance, no manifest, no health certification, no council trading permit, 17 violations in a single docking action. His skin shifted through a sequence of yellows that said, in ascending order, mildly irritating, slightly absurd, and not worth his mourning. He pulled the human species file as a formality. It was thin, thinner than species files ought to be, thin in the way that things which haven't done much yet are thin, 40 years faster than light capability. 3 council appearances, all logged as non-substantive, no known military vessels, no recorded territorial disputes with any registered species, no trade agreements beyond a handful of preliminary contacts that had never been ratified, no history of aggression, no history of anything that required active monitoring. They had been assessed at first contact as a developing species, pre-significant, the kind of entry you made in the registry because completeness was a principle, not because the entry would ever matter. Selvar sent a formal violation notice to Berth 47 listing all 17 infractions and the applicable fines. He filed a report with the KE Administrative Office for the sector as protocol required it. He did not contact the KE Military Division. He did not flag the situation as anything requiring elevated attention. Then he refilled his drinking bowl and moved on to the morning's actual work, because humans were nothing, and nothing did not require attention. The cargo bay of the Meridian was neat in the particular way that things are neat when the person responsible for them cannot afford for anything to be out of place. Lieutenant Commander Priya Sharma walked the rows of stacked crates with a data pad, running checks, rare earth minerals in the forward section, processed food stocks in the middle rows, medical supply containers along the starboard wall, everything labeled, everything is documented, everything exactly what a customs inspector would expect to find on a small human trading vessel, making a routine cargo run. She reached the back wall and pressed her palm flat against a panel that looked like a structural hull plate, A scan, a quiet confirmation tone. The wall opened. The room behind it was the size of a large closet, and nothing about it looked like mineral cargo, temperature-controlled, lit in low blue. The equipment arranged along the walls was behind protective housing, and the screens above each unit glowed a steady, even green. Priya did what she did every 12 hours, a visual pass, a reading check, every indicator confirmed, every system nominal. She stood in the blue light for a moment with the datapad at her side and felt the weight that had been sitting behind her sternum for 3 years. Settle in the way it always did when she came in here, not lighter, not heavier, just present, knowing the weight of what they were doing and what it would cost if they were wrong, and what it would cost if they were right, and how those two costs were not as different as she would have liked. 3 years, she thought. 3 years of building this, of running tests in the dark, of moving pieces into position so carefully and so quietly that nothing they did looked like what it was. 3 years of being the nothing species and letting the galaxy stay comfortable with that assessment. She closed the panel, went back to her inventory. The K official who came to berth 47 was young. His uniform was correct and pressed. His posture was properly authoritative, and he had clearly rehearsed the opening of this conversation at least twice in the corridor before coming in. Yara was eating cold rice and lentils from a container she had brought from home. The Meridian's galley unit was running at 80%, and she hadn't had time to service it, and she had learned years ago that you ate what you had when you had it because availability was not a thing you could count on. Captain Chen, the KE official said. His translator unit rendered it in flat standard speech. You are in violation of 17 separate Council and K-sector regulations regarding unauthorized entry, docking, and I got the notice. Yara said, I'll pay the fines before we depart. The K-Tath stopped. He had more sentences prepared. A cargo inspection will be required, he said. Of course, you will need to file a departure schedule with station control within 6 hours. Of course. He stood there for a moment. Yara ate a spoonful of lentils. He was trying to identify what kind of problem she was. She could see that going through the categories, looking for the one she fit. Hostile? Evasive? No. Confused? No, just sitting there, eating cold food in complete agreement with every requirement he was laying out. Why are you here? He asked. Not officially. The official part of the conversation was done. This was the real question slipping through when his training stepped aside for a moment and his actual curiosity stepped forward. He was young enough that he still did that. Yara looked at him. She thought about the official answer. Cargo run, supply stop, routine visit. She thought about the actual answer, which was long and would take the rest of the morning to explain properly. We wanted to see the station, she said. The K-Tath looked at her for a long moment, then he left. Yara finished her rice. Outside the berth window, the traffic lanes moved. 6 Kath ships in her line of sight. 2 of them are military, identifiable by the weapon configuration on their hulls. Each one so much larger than the Meridian that the comparison stopped being useful somewhere between the words larger and than. She had grown up knowing what the galaxy thought of her species. Not by being told exactly, by the quality of the silences and council meetings, by the way diplomatic channels returned responses that were polite and airless. Like correspondence with someone who had already decided the relationship had no future, by the particular way that representatives of larger, older, more powerful species looked at humans. Not with hostility, which would have implied they took humans seriously enough to be hostile, but with the patient, slightly pitying look you give something that doesn't yet understand the size of the room it's in. She had stopped being shaped by that look a long time ago. The day she stopped, she started building toward this one. She stood up, dropped the empty food container in the recycler, and walked back to the bridge. Scan status, she said. Running, Kofi said. Estimated completion in 2 hours and 40 minutes. Good. Oy's voice was even, but he had put down the stylus. That was unusual. 2 more KE military vessels just entered the lane behind us. Same holding pattern as the first 2. Still not targeting. No weapons locks, just positioned. They're watching, Yara said, or they're getting comfortable with the idea of blocking us when we try to leave. Yara considered the distinction for a moment. She sat down, pulled up the star map that she had looked at so many times over the past 3 years that she could have drawn it from memory in the dark. 17K systems, 12 Mirren trade routes, 4 species with permanent council seats, the territorial lines of a galaxy that had spent 4,000 years deciding who mattered and who didn't, and had arrived at those decisions with such confidence that it had stopped checking whether they were still accurate. The Meridian was a gray mark in Berth 47. One ship, one small scratched, unhurried human ship that had arrived without asking permission and was now eating cold lentils and running a scan and paying its fines without complaint. A nothing ship from a nothing species, nothing to look at, nothing to worry about. Yara looked at the map and thought about everything that the 4K military ships in the traffic lane behind her did not know, and felt something that was not quite satisfaction and not quite grief, and had no clean name she had ever found for it. Let them watch, she said. She put her hand on the console, steady, warm. They won't be watching much longer. The 6-hour deadline came and went. Yara filed no departure schedule. She sent a message to station control instead. Polite, brief, written in the careful standard speech that the universal translator handled without friction. The message explained that the Meridian had encountered a minor technical issue with its navigation calibration system and would require additional time at the berth. It apologized for the inconvenience. It offered to pay an extended docking fee. It included a reference number for the inconvenience report because humans in 40 years of interacting with galactic bureaucracy had learned that bureaucracies moved slower when you gave them paperwork. The extended docking fee was paid within the hour. At the KE Sector Administrative Office, the duty log was updated to reflect the delay. No alert was escalated. No additional action was taken. A human ship with a navigation problem, paying its fees, causing no visible trouble. Val, still on his shift, looked at the update and went back to his coffee. In Berth 47, the navigation system was functioning perfectly. Kofi sat at his sensor station and watched the scan results come in segment by segment, building a picture the way a developing photograph builds, dim at first, edges appearing before centers, detail arriving in pieces until the whole thing resolved into something clear. Veth Station's internal layout, its power distribution grid, the location and capacity of its defensive weapon emplacements, 4 of them positioned on the disk's outer rim, oriented toward external threats, the docking bay security systems, the fuel storage configuration, the communication relay architecture, including the backup arrays because the KE were thorough engineers, and thorough engineers always built in redundancy, and redundancy always left a pattern, if you knew how to read it. Kofi read it. The scan is complete, he said. Yara was at his side before he finished the sentence. She looked at the compiled data on his screen. She looked at it for a long time without saying anything. Her face did the thing it sometimes did. Went very still, the way deep water still goes. Not empty, full, the kind of still that meant something underneath was moving fast. Full copy to the secure partition, she said. Already done. Good. She straightened up. Tell Priya the inspection team will be here in the next 2 hours. She needs to be ready. Kofi nodded and reached for his comm unit. Then he stopped. Captain, he said it quietly, the way you say something when you're not sure if you should say it at all. They're going to find the partition. No, Yara said, they're not. She walked back to her chair and sat down. Outside, the 4K military ships held their positions in the traffic lane. They had not moved in 6 hours. They had not have armed weapons. They had not hailed the Meridian again. They were simply there, engines running at idle, patient in the way that large things with all the power are patient without urgency, because urgency implies the outcome is uncertain. Yara looked at them and thought about what patience costs when it turns out to have been misplaced. The inspection team was 3 KE in station security uniforms and 1 Marine from the Council's Trade Compliance Office. Standard composition for a cargo check on an unregistered vessel. The Marine brought a scanner and a datapad in the careful, unhurried manner of someone who did this every day. Priya met them at the cargo bay entrance with a smile that did not cost her anything and a manifest that was exactly what it claimed to be. She walked them through the forward section herself. Rare earth minerals, sealed containers, standard export-grade documentation complete. Food stocks, processed, vacuum-sealed, properly certified for interstellar transit. Medical supplies, standard humanitarian grade, nothing restricted. The Marine scanned everything. The 3 men looked at crate labels and opened 2 at random, which was procedure, and found exactly what the label said was inside them, which was also procedure. They reached the back wall. The Marine ran his scanner along it. The scanner returned structural hull plate, composite alloy, standard Meridian class construction. He scanned it again. Same result. Priya stood with her hands relaxed at her sides and her datapad in her left hand and watched the scanner do its work with the expression of someone who had nothing to hide and was mildly bored by the thoroughness required to confirm the aft wall. The Marine said the density reading is slightly irregular. We took a hit from micro debris about 8 months ago. Priya said had to reinforce it from the inside. The repair material has a different composite rating than the original hull plate. It reads inconsistent sometimes. She turned to her datapad and pulled up a file. Maintenance log if you need it. Date. Materials used. Supervising engineer's signature. The Marine looked at the log. He looked at the wall. He ran the scanner one more time. Structural hull plate. He made a note in his compliance file and moved on. Priya walked the rest of the inspection without the maintenance log ever leaving her hand just in case. Admiral Vithan arrived at Vet Station at 1400 hours. This was unusual. Admiral Vithan commanded the KE Empire's 4th Fleet, a position that involved strategic oversight of 3 sectors, a staff of 40, and a schedule that did not, under ordinary circumstances, include personal visits to docking violations logged by a duty officer at 0312 in the morning. He arrived on a fast courier, stepped onto the station with 2 aides and no advanced notice, and went directly to the administrative office. He looked at the Meridian's docking record. He looked at the scan the station had automatically run when it arrived. A routine external scan, the kind every ship received, covering hull configuration and mass displacement. He looked at the mass displacement number for a long time. Then he called for the station's senior security officer. The human ship then said, "What does it carry?" "Cargo inspection was completed an hour ago, sir. Minerals, food stocks, medical supplies, all documented. No violations. Its mass displacement is 40% higher than a Meridian-class hull should register." The security officer said nothing for a moment. "Then the inspection found no anomaly, sir." "The inspection found what it was shown," Vicon said. He turned to his aide. "I want a full-spectrum scan, military grade. Run it from the patrol ships already in the lane." "Sir, we would need to run it." The aide left. Vieth Khan stood at the window of the administrative office and looked out at the docking section, where far below and across the station, Disk 47 sat quiet and gray and small. He had served in the KE Fleet for 38 years. He had fought 3 border engagements, negotiated 2 post-conflict treaties, and spent the last decade managing a sector that required constant attention and occasional force. He was not a man who frightened easily, and he is not frightened now. But he was paying attention that 40% a Meridian-class hull stock configuration should have displaced a known and predictable mass. He had looked it up because he was thorough and thoroughness had kept him alive in 3 engagements. The Meridian's displacement number did not match. It was heavier than it looked, by exactly the kind of margin that meant something was aboard that was not on any manifest. Heavy things, in his experience, were either very valuable or very dangerous, sometimes both. Kofi saw the military grade scan begin in 14 and 47. He saw it because the Meridian's passive sensors were very good, better than anyone outside the ship knew they were. And because the KE patrol ships powered up their deep scan arrays in a sequence that the Meridian systems recognized and flagged before the first, ping went out. "They're running a military scan," he said. Yarao was already at his station. "How long do we have before it completes?" 6 minutes? Maybe 7. Ozzy came around from the navigation console without being asked. He stood at Yara's shoulder, not chewing his stylus, both hands open at his sides. After 6 minutes, Yara thought through the sequence. The scan would complete. It would return the partition. The partition's contents would be read. The Admiral, because someone with the authority to order a military scan had arrived, which meant an Admiral, which meant this had moved several levels above a docking violation, would understand what he was looking at. And then the question would be what he did next. "Priya?" Ajura said calmly. "I see it," Priya said from the cargo bay. Her voice was even professional. The voice of someone who had been living inside this possibility for 3 years and had stopped being surprised by its arrival. "How long to activate?" 4 minutes. "Do it." A pause. "Just 1 breath long." "Understood," Priya said. Yara turned to Ozzy. "Get us ready to undock. If we undock now, I know the 4 ships in the lane." "I know," Yara said. Her voice did not rise, did not sharpen. It was the same temperature it had been all morning, which was the temperature of someone who had war-gamed this exact moment more times than she could count, and arrived at the same place every time. "Get us ready." Oy went back to his console. Yara stood in the middle of the bridge and looked at the forward window where Vith Station turned its slow, eternal turn, where 600,000 beings went about their morning without the slightest awareness of what was sitting in berth 47, and felt that unnamed thing again. Not satisfaction, not grief, something in the space between them that had no word in any language she knew. 40 years, she thought. The galaxy had spent 40 years deciding what humans were. It had done so without asking, without watching carefully, without ever really looking at the small gray species in the corner that kept to itself and said very little, and went home from council meetings and did not appear to be doing anything of note. It had been wrong about the saying very little. Humans had been saying things just not out loud, not in chambers where other species could hear and weigh and file away the intelligence. Humans had been saying things in laboratories, in shipyards, in the long dark hours of test runs in empty space, far from any registered traffic lane. Humans had been having the conversation that mattered most, the one you have with yourself honestly, about what you are and what you are not, and what you will be required to become, and arriving at conclusions that would not have seemed possible 40 years ago, when they were new and clumsy and still making the basic mistakes of a species that had just figured out how large the room was. They were not making those mistakes anymore. "Captain, it was Kofi queerer than usual. The military scan is going to read the partition. There's nothing we can do about that." "No," Yara agreed. "They're going to know. Yes." "And then the ships in the lane are going to have to make a choice," Yara said. She turned to look at him. He was 26. He had trained for this for 2 years. He had never once in 2 years told her he wasn't ready. She had believed him. She believed him now. And so are we. She looked at the 4K military ships holding position outside. Then she reached for the comm. "This is Captain Chen to all the crew. She said stations now." The Meridian's internal lights shifted from white to the low amber of condition. Readiness. Not red, not yet, but not the comfortable white of a ship at rest either. Footsteps moved through the corridors, hatches sealed. Systems came online one by one. The ship woke up in pieces, shaking off the stillness of the past 14 hours. Yara sat down. The military scan was completed in 1453. For approximately 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then all 4 K ships in the traffic lane powered their weapons to active status simultaneously. "Yeah, there it is," Pei said. The station calmed down, and incoming hail priority-coded Admiral-level authority. Yara let it run for 1 full second before she answered. Captain Chen Beth Khan's voice was exactly what she had expected, controlled, hard, the voice of a man who had done this before and was not performing authority, but actually exercising it. "You will power down your systems and prepare to be boarded immediately." Admiral Yara said, "I want you to understand something before you give your next order. You are not. Look at what the scan found." She said, "Look at it carefully. Think about what it means that we have it. Think about how we got it onto a ship that passed a full cargo inspection." She paused and then thought about why we came here. A silence, not a long one, maybe 4 seconds. But it was a different kind of silence than the ones that had come before. Not the silence of something being dismissed. The silence of something being reassessed. "Why did you come here?" the Admiral said. Yara looked at the forward window at the station, at the 4 armed ships beyond the glass. "To show you we could," she said. Outside, the Kiet ships held their positions. They had not fired, not yet. But the thing that had changed, the thing that would keep changing from this moment forward, that could not be unchanged, no matter what happened next, was that they were no longer certain whether they should. For 40 years, the galaxy had known what humans were. I was no longer sure. The boarding team arrived at berth 47 at 15:01. 12 K soldiers in full combat armor moving in a 2-column formation down the docking arm, weapons raised to the ready carry position, not aimed but close enough that the distinction was mostly philosophical. Behind them, 2 more in technical gear carrying cutting equipment for the airlock. If it came to that, the Meridian's outer airlock had been sealed and hardened 11 minutes ago. The kind of seal that wasn't a navigation malfunction or a technical delay or any of the other polite administrative fictions the morning had offered. The kind of seal that said no. The cutting team moved to the front. Yara watched them through the airlock camera feed. 12 soldiers, standard Cath combat loadout. She had studied Meth combat doctrine for 2 years, not in any official sense, not through any channel that would have appeared in a database somewhere, but in the particular way that humans had spent 40 years studying everything they could about every species they could, quietly in the way of people who understood that one day the studying would matter. "They'll be through the outer lock in 4 minutes, Priya said over the internal comm. She was in the cargo bay. She had been there since Yara gave the order. Her voice had not changed register once in the past 20 minutes. "We need 7, Yara said with a pause. "Then we need to give them something else to think about." Priya said it already. Kofi said he opened a broadcast channel. Not to the Admiral, not to the boarding team, to every ship in the traffic lanes around Beth Station, every registered vessel in a 2-kilometer radius. Key merchants, Marin couriers, Sarathi haulers, 3 independent operators of unknown registration. He broadcast in standard speech simultaneously on every open frequency. "This is the ISV Meridian. We are currently being boarded by Keith military forces inside a civilian docking station. This action is being recorded and transmitted. Any vessel in receiving range should be aware." Pei looked at him. "That's going to make them angrier. It's going to make them careful." Kofi said a different thing. He was right. In the administrative office, Vithcon received 3 simultaneous incoming hails from civilian vessels demanding clarification on whether the station was under a military security action, what the protocols for civilian evacuation were, and whether docked ships should be moving to a safe distance. He also received a priority query from the Marine Council representative, who had been in the middle of his afternoon meal and was now very much not. Vithon looked at the incoming hailers. He looked at the boarding team's progress feed. He looked at the scan results from the Meridian's hidden partition, which were still open on his screen and which had not stopped being what they were, regardless of everything else that was happening. He told his aide to hold the civilian hails. He told the boarding team to continue. He stood at the window and watched berth 47 and said nothing in the specific silence of a man who has made a decision and is waiting to see what it costs him. The outer airlock seal broke in 15:06. The boarding team entered the docking arm. The inner airlock held for 40 more seconds, not because the seal was stronger, but because the Meridian systems routed power from 2 secondary systems directly into the lock mechanism at the last moment, buying the seconds the way you spend emergency money, knowing exactly what you're depleting and doing it anyway. 40 seconds. In the cargo bay, Priya's hands moved with the speed of someone who had rehearsed the sequence so many times that her hands knew it better than her conscious mind did. The partition panel opens, the blue light, the screen's still green. She initiated the startup sequence and stepped back and watched the indicators climb through their stages. Power calibration, target lock, and felt the weight in her sternum shift from dread to something she didn't have a clean name for. Either readiness may be the specific readiness of a thing that has been built for a purpose and is now being asked to fulfill it. The inner airlock broke. The boarding team entered the Meridian, and the Meridian undocked. Not gracefully, not according to any standard departure protocol. The docking clamps released in a sequence that was technically a malfunction and practically a choice. And the Meridian's maneuvering thrusters fired hard enough to push it sideways out of berth 47 in a motion that no docking simulation had ever included, because no docking simulation had ever assumed a ship would want to exit a berth laterally at combat thrust. The docking arm tore. The station's structural integrity alarm began to sound. The boarding team inside the Meridian's corridor went from a controlled 2-column advance to 6 different directions at once as the floor lurched sideways and gravity. Compensation lagged by 2 full seconds. 2 seconds was enough. The 4 key military ships in the traffic lane opened fire at 15:08, not at the Meridian directly. At first, warning shots, the kind that bracket a target and say stop. The kind that said the Admiral had not yet given the order to destroy, only to disable. The Meridian did not stop. It accelerated not toward the exit vector where the KE ships were positioned and waiting. It turned inside the traffic lane close, very close, tight enough that 2 civilian haulers broke from their lanes in emergency avoidance and leader array and started broadcasting collision warnings in 3 languages. The Meridian moved through the gap between them like it had calculated exactly how much space was needed and trusted the calculation. Absolutely. Ozzy was flying with both hands and his whole body weight behind every input. Sweat already on his neck, working the controls with the focused intensity of a man who was not thinking about anything except the next 3 seconds. Because the next 3 seconds were all that existed. Lane 2 is open for 4.2 seconds, Kofi said. Taking it, Ozzy said. The Meridian went through Lane 2. The K ships adjusted. They were fast, better maneuvering than their size suggested. Well piloted, operating as a coordinated unit. They had trained for intercept scenarios, they had run them in simulations and in live exercises, and they knew what they were doing. They had not trained for a ship that flew like it had nothing to lose, because it didn't. A human crew in a human ship in the middle of K territory, with a military boarding team still inside its corridors and 4 warships forming up to disable. It had, in practical terms, no good options. They knew that. Yara knew it. Every person on the bridge knew it. The thing about having no good options was that it simplified the decision. You didn't spend time looking for the best one. You spent time executing the one you had, Priya, Yara said. 30 seconds, Priya said. A Keth ship fired again, not a warning shot this time. A disabling beam aimed at the Meridian's engine section. It grazed the port rear quarter and the ship shook, not like being hit. Exactly. More like being grabbed and shaken by something much larger than you, and then released. The kind of shake that rattles teeth and sends anything not secured to the floor in 3 different directions. An alert came up on the damage board. Port thruster output down 20%. We can work with that, OC said, and adjusted and did not stop flying. In the corridor, the boarding team was still moving. 7 of the 12 had maintained their formation. The other 5 were dealing with the ship's irregular movement in 5 different ways, most of which involved the floor, and none of which were planned. The team leader, to his credit, had identified the direction of the bridge and was pushing forward with the 7 he had. They reached the cargo bay entrance. Priya was waiting on the other side of the sealed hatch with a fire suppression canister in one hand and the sealed partition behind her. She did not open the hatch. She opened the ventilation relay above it instead. The fire suppression compound rated for electrical fires, non-toxic, approved for use in enclosed spaces with personnel present, which was why it was certified and listed on the manifest, and had passed the cargo inspection without comment, filled the corridor in approximately 4 seconds. It was not toxic. It was, however, entirely opaque, and it was, in the confined space of the corridor, extremely disorienting. The boarding team stopped moving forward. Priya sealed the ventilation relay and went back to the partition. Yara heard the corridor go quiet through the clear's throat internal audio feed and let out a breath she had been holding for longer than was medically ideal. How long? She said they'll route around through the service corridor. Kofi said maybe 4 minutes before they find the alternate access. How long for Priya? She said 30 seconds. That was 90 seconds ago. Yara looked at the board, port thruster at 80%, station alert still sounding. The torn docking arm had triggered it and it had not stopped. 3 civilian ships in emergency holds. Traffic lanes scattered. The 4 KET warships had spread their formation, cutting off the primary exit vector and beginning to flank the secondary. They were good. They were genuinely very good. And they were going to have the Meridian in a full disable lock in approximately 6 minutes unless something changed. Captain Priya's voice. "I'm here. It's ready." 2 words, flat. Professional, carrying everything and showing none of it. The way someone speaks when they have spent 3 years building toward a moment, and the moment has arrived, and there is nothing left to do but the thing to do. Yara said, "Pause 1 second, the length of a full breath." Then Priya activated the array. The Kahath warship on the northern flank position lost its navigation system in 1512, not from a weapon impact, not from any projectile or beam that showed up on its tactical sensors. Its navigation system simply failed, a cascading fault through the targeting architecture spreading to propulsion control, the kind of fault pattern that looked like a catastrophic internal error and had no external cause that the damage control team could identify in the first 3 minutes of searching. It drifted. The second ship moving to compensate for the first found its communication array going dark. Not destroyed, dark, offline, alive but silent, unable to receive or transmit in the administrative office. Vithon received these reports in the span of 40 seconds and understood with the clarity of a man who had been in 3 engagements and knew what sudden and impossible system failures in formation ships meant, that the situation had changed, not deteriorated, changed into something he did not yet have a name for. He looked at the scan results on his screen, the partition contents, what the military scan had found. He had been looking at it wrong. He had been asking, what is this, and how do we neutralize it? The correct question, the one he was only now arriving at, which was in the privacy of his own thoughts approximately 3 hours too late, was, why did they bring it here in one ship? In one small ship that arrived without clearance and paid its fines and waited for a cargo inspection to complete. Why here? Why now? Why one ship? He looked at the traffic lane where the Meridian was moving in a pattern that no combat doctrine covered. because no combat doctrine had ever needed to account for a ship that flew as if it was willing to be destroyed as long as it was not destroyed in the next 5 minutes. What is in 5 minutes? He thought. He picked up his calm. The two KE ships in the southern position closed the gap. They were trying to box the meridian between the station disk and their formation. A standard pincer that removed the maneuvering options one by one until the only remaining option was surrender or collision. The meridian chose the gap that should not have existed. It was 4 ship lengths wide between the station's outer disk and the southern warship's port side. Standard tactical doctrine said you did not take that gap because the station's structural edge made the approach angle unworkable. Standard tactical doctrine assumed you were flying a ship whose pilot was operating inside an acceptable risk threshold. OC was not. The meridian went through. The southern warship's sensor array caught the edge of the station disk, trying to close the gap, and had to pull out of the pincer to avoid a collision. The second southern ship, coordinating with the first, was out of position for 6 seconds. 6 seconds was the margin. The meridian broke through the southern position and hit open space. Another hit from the Keth ship, rear quarter starboard, this time was hard enough that the lights on the bridge dropped to emergency amber for 4 seconds before the backup power routed through. The damage board added a starboard rear thruster to the list. Engine output down to 62%. Kofiara said, "I see it." He was already on the transmission. A broadcast package is sent. The broadcast was not on an open civilian frequency this time. It was on a specific encrypted channel, tightly focused, aimed at a specific set of coordinates outside Sector 9. It was 11 characters long. It said, "We are here at a time. Come now." Yara looked at the forward window. Stars open space ahead. The Caheath ships reformed behind her, their formation tighter now, their approach faster. They were done being careful, done managing the civilian optics, done giving the small human ship room to maneuver. The Meridian was running at 62% engine output, with a boarding team still in her corridors, and a cargo bay that had just changed the nature of this engagement, and a crew that had been awake for 36 hours and intended to be awake for as many more as required. One ship. The Galaxy had sent 4 warships after one ship, and the ship was still flying. Yara felt the unnamed thing in her chest again. Not satisfaction, not grief, something that lived in the specific quiet of a person who has given everything they had to a plan and does not yet know whether it was enough, but who made peace with that uncertainty a long time ago and found against expectation that it held. "How long until they respond to the broadcast?" Osi said. Yara knew the answer down to the minute. "Had known it for 3 years, 14 hours, she said, "and until the Keth gets a full weapons lock on us." She looked at the board. 11 minutes, she said. Oye took his hands off the controls for exactly 1 second, looked at them, put them back. "Right then," he said. He flew. The Ketath did not destroy the Meridian. This surprised almost everyone on the bridge, including privately Yara. Not because the Kath were merciful, not because they had run out of options, but because somewhere between the second warship going dark and the Meridian, breaking the southern pincer, and the broadcast going out on the encrypted channel, Admiral Veith Khan had made a calculation. The kind of calculation that experienced commanders made when the situation stopped making sense in the ways they were trained to handle. When the variables stopped fitting the models, and the only honest response to that was to stop and think before you fired. He had ordered a pursuit formation instead of an intercept. Follow, contain. Do not destroy. Not yet. It cost him 2 KE ships recovering from the array's damage. The civilian ships filed formal complaints with the council office about the station breach, the torn docking arm, the traffic disruption. 3 separate hails from KH High Command asking for a status report. The Marine representative writing a detailed grievance in real time and transmitting it to the regional council seat. VTH Khan answered none of them. He was reading Meridian's technical file. Every piece of data his analysts could find on Meridian-class human vessels, on human ship engineering, on human technical development over the last 40 years. He was reading it with the specific attention of a man looking for the thing he missed, the thing that had been there all along and had not looked like what it was. He found it at hour 3, or rather, he found the absence of it. Human ship development had been logged and tracked by Council observers intermittently and without particular urgency since first contact. The record showed a gradual, unremarkable progression. Early vessels, slow, unshielded, operating at the low end of FTL capacity. Then, over 10 years, modest improvements, slightly better drive efficiency, slightly improved hull composites. The kind of development curve that matched a young species learning from its own mistakes at the expected rate. The record stopped being updated 14 years ago, not because human development had stopped, because the Council had stopped looking. 14 years of development with no observers. 14 years of a species that had learned very early on that the galaxy was not paying attention and had made a choice about what to do with that. VTH Khan put the file down. He looked at the pursuit formation on his tactical screen. 4 ships now, 3 functional trailing the Meridian through open space at a distance that was technically a pursuit and practically an escort. He thought about the array that had taken 2 of his ships offline without a single visible weapon discharge. He thought about the scanned data from the hidden partition. He thought about a species that had spent 40 years being assessed as insignificant and had never once corrected the assessment. He thought about the broadcast of 11 encrypted messages aimed at coordinates outside the sector. He had his signals team working on the decryption. They had been working on it for 6 hours. They had not broken it. Human encryption. It turned out was not at the developmental level the last observer report had suggested. The last observer report was 14 years old. Sir, his aide. Quiet. The kind of quiet that meant the news was not straightforward. We have a report from Sector 12. Vithon looked up. A human ship has appeared at the entry point to the K8th home system, unannounced, requesting no clearance. The aide paused. It is a holding position. It has not entered the system. Vithon said nothing. There is also a report from the Marine Collective's primary trade station. Another pause. A human ship. Silence on the bridge of the courier. Real silence. The kind that happens when everyone in a room arrives at the same place simultaneously. How many? Vithon said. The aide looked at his datapad. The reports were still coming in. He watched them arrive one by one from different sectors, different stations, different points in the galaxy that had been chosen with a precision that was not random and was not coincidental, and was not the action of a species that had spent the last 40 years doing very little. 17, the aide said. VTH Khan stood up. The reports came into the Galactic Council's central communications hub at Axis Station, like stones dropping into still water. 1 human ship at the time system entry point, 1 at the Marine primary trade hub, 1 at the Sarai Exchange's central station, 1 at the Council's own secondary seat in Sector 4, 1 at each of the 3 major FTL relay points that all interstellar communication in the known galaxy routed through, 1 at the fuel processing complex that supplied 60% of KE fleet operations, 1 at the agricultural export hub serving 4 non-aligned species not inside any of these places, at them outside visible holding position in the particular way that things hold position when they want to be seen, and want you to think about what it means that they are there. No weapons fired, no communication beyond basic identification. We are here. We are human. We are the ISV such and such. We have filed no flight plan, and we require nothing from you, simply arrived present, accounted for the Council emergency session convened at hour 7. Selver was in it. He looked considerably less comfortable than he had that morning when the human ship had been a minor administrative nuisance that did not require attention. His skin was running through the yellow to orange range in a way that suggested he had not chosen to be in that color and would have preferred to be elsewhere. The session opened with a question that was already on every representative screen. How not? What do we do? That was the second question, and it was urgent, and it would require careful answers. But before that, unavoidably, irresistibly, how did a species that had achieved FTL 40 years ago build 17 ships capable of appearing simultaneously at 17 strategically chosen locations across the known galaxy? How did those ships have the navigational precision to arrive within minutes of each other across distances that should have required weeks of coordinated travel? How did the ship at Veth Station carry technology that disabled 2 KT warships without weapons? How had none of this appeared in any report, any observation, any intelligence assessment in 14 years? The answer was already forming in the room before anyone said it. They had not been looking. They had decided early that humans were not worth watching closely, and they had not updated that decision. And humans had known this, had understood it, had seen it, had lived inside that dismissal every day for 4 decades, and had made a very deliberate choice about what to do with the freedom it offered. The representative from the Sarathi Exchange, a species known for its commercial precision and very little else, said it plainly. We told them they were nothing, she said, and they used the time we gave them. On the meridian hour 11, Yara was asleep in her chair, not by choice. She had not intended to sleep. She had been reviewing the damage reports, port thruster at 60%, starboard rear thruster offline, hull integrity at 91%, minor breach sealed in corridor 3. And the last thing she remembered was looking at the starboard thruster readout and thinking that OC could compensate for the loss with 2 specific adjustments to the secondary drive configuration. Then Kofi was touching her shoulder and saying, "Captain?" And the bridge was the same amber light, and the stars were the same stars, and 3 hours had passed. She sat up. "Report," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was grateful for that. "K formation is still behind us," Kofi said. "Same distance. They haven't closed in 2 hours. The broadcast responses received 14 confirmations. Encrypted return signals from all 17 positions. Everyone is in place and holding." Yara straightened, rolled her neck once to the left, once to the right, looked at the forward window and the Admiral. "He's been trying to hail us for 6 hours," he said. He was at the navigation console in the same position he had been in when she fell asleep, flying the Meridian on its wide holding arc through open space with the patient, grinding the focus of someone who had decided that stopping was not a thing he was willing to do. There was a new stylus in his hand. The previous one chewed to splinters somewhere around hour 8. "I didn't put any of them through." "Put the next one through," Yara said. Ozzy looked at her. "We've made our point," she said. She stood up, straightened her jacket. Not out of vanity, but because some gestures mattered regardless of context. And how you held yourself when you answered a 4-star admiral who had spent the past 11 hours chasing you through his own territory was one of them. The hail came 3 minutes later. Vithon's voice was different, not softer, not friendly, but the texture of it had changed. The part that had been certain was gone, replaced by something that was doing its best not to show how thoroughly it had been rearranged. "Captain Chen, Admiral, you will explain what your ships are doing at those positions," he said. "They are doing nothing," Yara said. "They are present. That is the entirety of their current action. That is not rested. What do you want?" There it was. 40 years of a galaxy that had never once asked that question in a tone that meant it. 40 years of a species that had been processed, assessed, categorized, and filed and never consulted, never approached, never asked what it needed or what it thought or what it might become with enough time and enough room. "What do you want?" Yara had thought about this answer for a long time. "A seat," she said at the council. "A real one with real weight, a silence, and if we refuse, Then our ships continue to hold their positions, Yara said. At the FTL relay points, the fuel complex, the trade hubs, holding position, doing nothing, for as long as is necessary, she paused. We are very patient, Admiral. You have had 40 years of evidence of that. Another silence longer. The technology your ship carried. Vithon said, The array, the encrypted drives. How long have you had? Yara said. She let that sit through the forward window. The KE pursuit formation held its distance. 3 ships now, the 4th still running on partial systems from the array. They had not closed in 11 hours. They would not close now. She knew it the same way she knew the tension in a room before it shifted. From experience, from attention, from 40 years of watching the galaxy and learning how it moved. The council session is already convening, Vithon said finally. Not a concession, just information offered in the tone of a man organizing the facts of a situation he could not undo. I know, Yara said. You knew it would. It was the only way this ends without someone making an error they can't take back. She looked at the stars ahead. Somewhere in the dark, 14 hours from the broadcast that had gone out through the encrypted channel, 17 human ships sat at 17 positions across the galaxy, quiet, unhurried, unarmed in the sense that mattered, which was that none of them intended to fire unless fired upon. They were not a fleet in the military sense. They were not a threat in the conventional sense. They were a fact. The fact that a species the galaxy had decided nothing had been building, and thinking and preparing and waiting, not out of aggression, not out of hatred, not out of the hunger for conquest that the galaxy's own history suggested, was the only reason a species developed weapons, but out of the simple, patient, absolute refusal to spend one more decade being nothing because someone else had decided they were. The Kaeth had 4,000 years of history. The Marin had cataloged every species in the known galaxy. The Council had been managing the architecture of interstellar civilization since before humans had writing, and none of them had seen this coming. Because they had decided not to look, Yara cut the channel and turned to her crew. Kofi at his station, dark rings under his eyes, running on whatever combination of focus and coffee had gotten him through the last 14 hours. OI navigation, hands on the controls, new stylus already acquiring damage at the tip. Priya's voice in the cargo bay running a post-activation check on the array, methodical as ever. The rest of them, 26 crew members across the length of this small, scratched, unremarkable ship, doing the quiet, unglamorous work of keeping it alive. Yara looked at them the way you look at something you built and tested and trusted, and then watched perform under pressure exactly as it was built to perform. 14 hours, she said. Then we go in. Where do you go? Kofi asked. Council session, Yara said. They're going to want to talk. Ozzy almost smiled. Almost. They're going to want to do a lot more than talk. He said, Yes, Yara said. They are. She sat back down. Outside, the galaxy was doing what the galaxy does when something it was certain about turns out to be wrong. Adjusting slowly, painfully in the way that large things adjust, with resistance and noise, and the particular discomfort of a certainty rearranging itself into something more honest. It was not comfortable. It was not supposed to be. The Meridian flew on. The council chamber on the access station was built to impress. That was its primary architectural function, more than acoustics, more than capacity, more than the practical requirements of running a session. It was built the way that power builds things when it wants you to feel small before you open your mouth. High ceilings, curved walls of pale stone that had been carried across 3 star systems, because the founding species wanted material that held memory. Long approach corridors that made every entrance a walk long enough to think about what you were walking toward. Yara walked it in 11 seconds. She was not small. She wore a captain's jacket, the same one she had worn at berth 47, which now had a scorch mark on the left sleeve from hour 9 of the pursuit. which she had decided not to change, for the same reason she had kept the gouge on the Meridian's porthole. Some marks were information. Some marks said, "We were here. We took the hit. We kept moving." She walked to the speaking floor and stood in the center of it and looked up at the assembled representatives of every species in the known galaxy. There were 31 of them, some she recognized from the files, some she had never seen outside of reference images. The Kaith block sat in their section, 7 representatives, Veith Khan among them. He was not a council member, but he had been granted observer status for this session, which told her something about how much the Keith High Command wanted to understand what had happened before deciding how to respond to it. The men sat in a long curve. Silvar was there, his skin cycling through colors she did not have the cultural fluency to read precisely, but which all ran in the general direction of discomfort. The Sarathi representative, the one who had said we told them they were nothing, and they used the time we gave them, looked at Yara with the steady attention of someone doing an honest assessment. Yara respected that. The chamber went quiet. The session chair, a Marin elder, whose skin had gone the deep settled blue of someone who had been doing this for a very long time and had stopped being rattled by most of it, opened the session with a formal record. One human ship had entered KE territory without authorization. One human ship had resisted illegal boarding action. One human ship had caused damage to a civilian docking structure and disrupted registered traffic lanes. 17 human ships had appeared simultaneously at positions of strategic significance across the known galaxy and were currently holding those positions without further action. The session chair put down the record. "Captain Chen," he said, "the floor is yours." Yara had written the speech 3 times over 3 years. The first version was long, the second was precise. The third, which was the one she had decided on 6 months ago and had not changed since, was neither. She said, 40 years ago, your observers came to our system. They assessed us. They filed a report. The report said we were a developing species, pre-significant, not requiring active monitoring. They were thorough. They were professional. They were completely correct about what we were at the time. She let that land. They did not come back. No one did. For 14 years, no one looked at us closely enough to update that assessment. We understand why you have 31 member species and their needs and conflicts and treaties to manage. We were not a priority. We were not asking to be one. We were building, she said, not loudly. Not with the particular heat of someone making a threat. The way you say a thing that is simply true and does not need volume to carry its weight. We were building because we understood that the galaxy does not give significance. It recognizes it eventually when it has no other option. We did not want to spend another 40 years waiting for that recognition. While filing attendance at sessions where nothing we said was heard, she paused. So we made ourselves heard in the only language that has ever worked here. Presence, position, the 17 ships at the 17 points. We do not want war, she said. We have never wanted war. We want what every species in this room was given when they joined. A voice that carries, a seat that counts, a place in the decisions that shape the galaxy we all live in. That is all we have ever wanted. We simply could not get it by asking. The chamber was very quiet. The key block was still. Veithan had his hands flat on the railing in front of him. He was looking at her with the expression she had first read in his voice during their last communication. Not the certainty that had been there at the beginning, but what was growing in the space. The certainty had left behind. Something adjacent to respect, not warm, not easy. The reluctant kind, the kind that cost something to give, which was the only kind worth having. You disabled 2 military vessels, said a Keith representative, younger than Fath Khan, sharper in the defensive way of someone who had not yet finished being angry. We did, Yara said, without weapons that fire projectiles. Yes, that technology is ours, Yara said, as your weapons technology is yours, as your FTL architecture is yours, as the defensive systems on this station are yours. Every species in this room developed tools to protect itself. We developed ours. We used ours defensively to create time and distance, not to destroy. If we had wanted to destroy, we had the time and the position to do considerably more than we did. The young K representative said nothing. Silvar's skin had settled into a color Yara still couldn't read precisely. She thought it might be the marine equivalent of a man sitting very still, because moving would require him to acknowledge how wrong he had been, and he was not ready to do that yet. The Sarathi representative leaned forward. "The positions your ships have taken," she said. "The relay points, the fuel complex, the trade hubs." Her voice was not hostile. It was the voice of someone completing an analysis. "You chose them specifically." "Yes?" Yara said. "To demonstrate that you understand our infrastructure. To demonstrate that we have been paying attention," Yara said. "The same attention you declined to pay to us. A silence that is a threat," said a representative from a species Yara knew only as the Vane. Old members, quiet in council sessions, rarely the first to speak. Their representative had a quality of stillness that suggested great age or great patience, or both. "No," Yara said. "A threat says, do what I want or I will harm you. We are saying we exist. We are present. We are capable. We would like to be part of this." She looked across the chamber, all 31 of them. "The ships will leave those positions the moment this session ends. Regardless of the outcome, we are not holding the galaxy hostage. We are introducing ourselves properly in a way that could not be ignored." The session chair looked at her for a long moment. Then he called for the first consultation recess. Yara waited in the corridor outside the chamber. Priya was there. She had come aboard Axis Station on the shuttle with Yara and Kofi, and had not said much during the transit. She was saying less now, standing with her back against the wall and her arms crossed, and the expression of someone running calculations in their head that had nothing to do with numbers. "How do you think it went?" she said. "I think it went the way it needed to." Yara said, "That's not an answer." "No," Yara agreed. Kofi was sitting on the floor with his back against the opposite wall, long legs stretched out, head tilted back against the stone. He looked like a man who had not slept properly in 3 days, which was accurate, and who had arrived at a place past tiredness where the body stops complaining and simply continues, which was also accurate. "They're scared," he said, without opening his eyes. "Some of them," Yara said. "Most of them, yes. Is that good?" Yara thought about it. The honest answer was complicated in a way that the moment didn't have room for, so she gave the part of it that was true and sufficient. "It's honest," she said. "Scared means they're taking us seriously. We can work with fear. We could never work without being dismissed." Kofi opened one eye, looked at her, and closed it again. The recess lasted 2 hours. The vote was not unanimous. She had not expected it to be. Unanimity would have meant the result was either coerced or performed, and she wanted it neither. 22 in favor, 7 opposed, 2 abstentions. The session chair announced it in the flat procedural voice of someone for whom this was a process, not a moment, and that was fine. Processes were how things lasted. Moments passed. Humanity was granted full membership in the Galactic Council. 1 seat, full voting rights, all the obligations and entitlements that applied to every other member. Effective at the close of the session, Yara stood on the speaking floor and heard it, and felt nothing dramatic. That was the part no one told you about. The moments you had worked toward for years, when they arrived, did not feel the way the working toward had led you to expect. They felt quiet. They felt like something clicking into place in the dark. A small mechanical sound, a thing settling where it was meant to be. She thanked the session chair and the council, and walked back down the long corridor. Outside the chamber in the wide public hall of the access station, other species moved. Traders, diplomats, station residents, travelers. The ordinary life of a place where the galaxy met itself daily and got on with things. Most of them did not know what had just been decided in the chamber behind her. Most of them would know by morning. Vithon was waiting near the exit. She had not expected that. He stood with his hands behind his back and his uniform correct, and his face doing the thing it had been doing since their last communication, working through something that had not finished resolving. "Captain," he said. "Admiral, the array." He said it the way you say the thing you actually came to say after you have decided that the indirect approach is not going to serve you. "How long have you had it?" "Long enough," she said. Same answer as before. He looked at her. He was deciding whether to push. He decided not to. "The docking arm," he said instead. "Viath, station the damage." "We will pay for it," Yara said. "Submit the repair costs to the Human Council office. We will have one by the end of the month." Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile. The thing adjacent to a smile that lives in the face of a person who does not smile easily, but occasionally finds themselves standing next to something that would in another life be funny. "You planned for a council office," he said. "We planned for a lot of things," Yara said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he nodded. A small, deliberate motion, the kind that meant something specific in Keth body language, something she had read in the cultural briefings and now watched in person and found to be exactly as described. Acknowledgement without apology, recognition without surrender. She nodded back. He left the shuttle back to the meridian, which took 40 minutes. Yara sat in the co-pilot seat and looked out the forward window at the stars and did not talk. And Priya and Kofi did not make her. The three of them rode in the particular silence of people who have been through something together and do not need to process it out loud yet. The meridian came into view, gray, scratched, the gouge on the porthole catching the station light and throwing it back dull without shine. The scorch mark on the starboard rear, where the KE hit, had burned the paint down to the base layer. The docking clamps were repaired by OC and 2 engineers over a 6-hour period, while the council session ran because the ship needed to be able to leave under its own power. And the people who kept it flying did not stop doing that because the political piece was still moving. Yara looked at it the way you look at something that has been through it with you. Inside, the crew was waiting, not in formation, not in ceremony, just present in the corridors in the cargo bay and the bridge going about the work of keeping the ship alive, looking up when she came through the airlock in the way that people look up. When the person they have been quietly worrying about walks back through the door, she stood in the main corridor and looked at them. 26 people, average age 31, a combined total across all of them of more than 200 years of preparation for exactly this. People who had grown up in the same galaxy she had grown up in, who had heard the same silences in the same council sessions, who had carried the same weight of being from a species the galaxy had decided did not matter, and who had arrived at the same conclusion she had. Not with anger exactly, though anger had been part of the fuel, but with the particular cold clarity of people who had decided that the assessment was wrong, and they were going to spend as long as it took proving it, she said. We got the seat. No one cheered. That surprised her for half a second. Then Kay from the back of the corridor said, "About time," and went back to the thruster calibration he had been running, and someone else laughed. And someone else started talking about when the galley unit was going to be fixed, and the meridian filled with the ordinary noise of people who had done a hard thing and were now without ceremony getting on with the next one. Yara walked to the bridge. She sat in her captain's chair through the forward window. The access station made its slow turn. Beyond it, somewhere across the sectors, 17 human ships were powering their drives and preparing to leave the positions they had held quietly and without incident for the past 20 hours. They would file proper flight plans. They would proceed through registered traffic lanes. They would return to the human system or to their assigned waypoints, and they would, if anyone was paying attention, looked like what they were: ships. Ordinary ships. A species going home. The galaxy would be paying attention now. That was the thing that 40 years of being nothing had purchased in the end. Not safe. Safety was never guaranteed. And anyone who told you otherwise was selling something, not respect exactly, though some of what had been in Vithon's nod had been close enough to spend. What 40 years had purchased was the chance to be seen. Really seen clearly and fully, and without the comfortable assumption that there was nothing worth looking at. The chance to sit in a room where decisions were made and say, "We are here, we have been here, we were building while you were not watching, and we are not finished." Yara looked at the stars. She thought about the next 40 years. The galaxy thought it had just survived a crisis. A confrontation contained and resolved. Something to be logged and analyzed and learned from, and then carefully systemically managed. That was how the galaxy handled things that surprised it. It absorbed them, built frameworks around them, made them legible, and therefore controllable. She was going to let it think that for a while. Captain Kofi said he was at his station running post-mission checks with the quiet precision that was his particular mode of existence in the world. "Departure clearance is filed. We can leave whenever you're ready." Yara looked at the stars for one more moment. "Take us home," she said. The Meridian's drive powered up, steady, even the sound of something built to last. They went home.